Well, good morning, everyone. So great to, oh, there we go, now we got it. So great to see such a good crowd here. And I think this is a real treat to be able to hear our speaker. And I'm thrilled that he's here. I have a relationship going back with Doyle that he doesn't even know about, but I was out on the platform at Dallas Union Station when the World's Fair Daylight came through in 1984, and I was just amazed, just enthralled at that, and that's what has stoked the fire in me and my love of railroading and railroad history all these years later. That was 40 years ago. So I just wanted to say a couple of words here. I was thinking about this last night. Most people agree that the last full year of mainline steam in the U.S. was about 1956, somewhere along in there. And so if you were fortunate enough to hire on with the railroad somewhere along in that period, maybe you had a couple of years experience and then you got to operate one of those locomotives, you'd be 90 years old today. And one of the challenges we face in the railway preservation world is keeping that excitement and that enthusiasm going in a new generation, both in people who work in this field, and it's called heritage rail now. That's kind of the new term. And both people who work in this field and also our market that we serve, our audience with railroad museums and tourist railroads, it has evolved into something that is much more professional than it used to be. It used to be that we were just trying to save these trains from the scrapper's torch and get them to a safe haven and take care of them. Now it's a business. It's a full-blown business. And there were pioneers back in those days that helped preserve those pieces and helped bring them back to life and really pave the way for a lot of us, myself included, to work in this field today. And Doyle is one of them. And we are so happy and proud to have him here this morning to tell his story of his career. And I'm sure it will ring true to a lot of you personally. So, Robert, I kind of did the introduction, but I want you to come up here and introduce Doyle because you guys are great friends.
Good morning. Wow, that's hot. So that was Bob LaPrelle, our CEO of the Museum of the American Railroad. I'm one of the trustees, and I've known Doyle for a little over 20 years, 25 years, something like that. We've collaborated on some museum projects, and most recently, the Alco PA 59L. Doyle, as everybody knows, repatriated the 2 units from Mexico. So a little brief plug. Everybody's here gratis. The church, nobody's charging anything. If you should feel compelled at the end of this, there's a little QR code where you can donate to the 59L Alco PA Restoration Project. Also, at the conclusion of this, we're going to pass the hat to give a little gift offering for the church for hosting us. So if you feel compelled to throw a little cash in there, again, this is all gratis. We want to thank Pastor Pelham for allowing us to have access to his staff and the beautiful church. But with that, let's get moving. Doyle McCormack and his wife Laurie are here from Portland. I don't think he really needs any more announcement than that. Everybody, if you're here, you know who he is. He's got a fantastic slide presentation. Yes, so good morning. So this is Pastor Pelham's wife, Angelia, and she, I think, wants to speak on behalf of the city of Frisco. She's council member and mayor pro tem? Okay, council member. So I'm going to pass the microphone to her now, and then we'll get started.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to have everyone here today with us. This is quite an honor that we're able to host this particular presentation in this building. How many of you have been in this building before it was restored and it was the Abbey restaurant? So we've had some folks that have been in here. How many of you were here when it was the First Baptist Church and there was the altar right where the salad bar used to be? So this building, I believe, is coming up on maybe like 109 years old. It has withstood the fire that was downtown Frisco many years ago. It has been standing, I think, as a testament to God's glory, because it was one of the first churches here in Frisco. It went to Morteza, who made it the Abbey for about 25 years, and we purchased it from Morteza back in 2009 and restored it to be what it was initially intended to be, which was a church and a house of God. So we are happy to be downtown here on Main Street as a beacon of light, and our goal is to do exactly what we're doing, which is to bring the community in and have the community be a part of this place of worship. So we're excited to have you here today, and just welcome and enjoy yourself. And if you want to meander around, we've done quite a bit of restoration to this building, and so if you've been here, you probably will know that a lot of what you see in the back is not the same that you saw when you were here many years ago. But just enjoy this place. This is not only God's place, but this is Frisco's place. So thank you for being here today.
There we go. I'll bring you Doyle McCormack.
Is my mic? Yeah, my mic's turned on again. Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm always happy to talk about our projects. Robert and I have worked together. I've probably put 40 years into my project, and when I started it, everybody said, "You'll never get it out of Mexico." Well, I fooled them. I got them out of there. So this is sort of the history of what I've done with the PA that I have. And I've got to give you a little background here. The Nickel Plate Road, and some of you know what it was, and most of you probably don't, was a railroad that ran between Chicago and Buffalo, New York. And it had the New York Central on one side and the Pennsylvania on the other side, which were the two big giants. And the Nickel Plate survived because they could outrun them on a single-track railroad. And they survived right up until the merger in 1964 with the N&W. And our railroads were so close together, and I worked there for 11 years. And we'd be going along, and we'd catch these New York Central trains, and we'd just go right on by them. Down the railroad we'd go, because they'd load them down so heavy they couldn't make but about 35 or 40 mile an hour. And the Nickel Plate was a 60-mile-an-hour railroad. So that's sort of where my background was in the railroading. But I inherited this love for the railroad from my dad. He was a train dispatcher on the Nickel Plate. He put 51 years on the railroad, and he loved every day of it. And the guys I worked with said he was the best. So as a kid, I don't know how I got this disease of railroading, but I'd go to work with him and sit in the dispatcher's office, and I was fascinated the way he could manipulate the trains and keep them all fluid. And so when I was 10 years old, he took me on a ride. He had to do a qualifying trip twice a year. And he'd come home from a first job he worked, and he said, "You want to go for a train ride?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." I didn't know what was going on. We went down to the yard and climbed into the cab. Let's see. Of that locomotive right there. And that was a train they called the Flying Saucer. And we went from Conneaut, Ohio to Bellevue, Ohio. It was 132 miles. We did it in 2 hours and 40 minutes. So if you calculate that out, that's a 50-mile-an-hour average. So that was the poison that got into my system and made me want to be an engineer. And all I ever did from that point on was look towards to being an engineer. Everybody in school says, "Oh, you got to go to college. You got to." I said, "No, I know where I'm going." And when I graduated from school, high school there, I went right to the road foreman's office and talked to him. He knew me and I knew him. And he says, "We're in a recession. It's going to probably be a year, maybe 2 years before we get it back up where we need to hire some more people." So I just, I'm 18 years old and don't have anything in my future. So I went and joined the Navy. And that was, from my perspective, it was the smartest thing I ever did in my whole life. They make you grow up fast, but I learned a tremendous amount there and was able to get as far as being in submarine service for 2 years, which I really loved. Everybody else hated it, but I loved it. And I came home then 4 years later, and 5 days later I was working on the railroad, and that's where I wanted to be. So about 1968, I think it was 68, they brought one of the nickel plate Berkshires back to Conneaut. They'd leased the roundhouse and was going to put it in excursion service. And I went down one day and I stuck my head in the window and there was nobody around. They had a big do not enter sign. And this young guy comes by and he says, "Hi, can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, you looking for help?" He said, "Yeah, come on in, sucker." But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. My dad, I was actually an engineer when I was 15 years old. And that's the train I ran. My dad built that from the ground up with his own hands. We had it at a little town called Geneva on the Lake, a tourist attraction there. And boy, did I have fun there. So that was my first job as a locomotive engineer. So then in 1955, my dad took me on a ride. He had to make another qualifying trip. And he took me on one of the passenger trains, which was in Alco, PA. And we got up in the cab. Well, now I'm really fascinated. By then, steam engines were everywhere, but these nice blue and white locomotives, there were only 11 of them on the whole system. And I became real enamored with that. So I always had this fixation or fantasy that I wanted to own one of those engines. And there's a couple of photos here of, I'd been to Chicago on a fan trip and come home and got off the train, and that was just a photograph. And then a few years later, there was a group come to town my brother said they've got a Berkshire down there in the roundhouse. They're going to rebuild it. I said, "Huh." So I went down, stuck my head in the wall, and we ended up that time to put together this train for the Golden Spike Centennial Limited in 1969. We were going to go all the way to Ogden, Utah, but at that point, the Union Pacific wasn't really friendly to outside steam engines. But we went all the way to Kansas City, and they took it out with diesels, and they came back. And it was quite an adventure. And things went on, and I worked on the engines, and the guys at the High Iron Company talked about this bicentennial thing. And so they started working on this Freedom Train. And it was on again, off again, on again, off again. And we're going to run it this way, we're going to do it this way, that way. And there in 70? Somewhere in there. No, it was 77. And I got this phone call. "Hey, we're going to Portland and do the daylight for the Freedom Train. You want to go?" And dummy me. And it was 75, I guess. And late 75, actually November, just a week before Thanksgiving, I packed up off to Portland, Oregon. Never been west of the Mississippi other than to go to Ogden. And see where I'm at here. This was our adventure with the Freedom Train. It's on the road, Laurie and I, for 2.5 years, from the time we left home till the time we got home. And, there's an old adage that says you can never go home. When we got home, we'd seen the world and what it had to offer, and we looked at each other and said, "What are we doing here?" So we packed up and we moved to Portland, and I would talk to several of the railroads there, and the Southern Pacific was the one that I decided that's where I wanted to go, and they hired me because I knew those people too, because of the rebuild of the 49 there. They were involved, and I knew all the people. So I got a job in there as a fireman, engineer, and that's where I spent the rest of my career. So I got to put my glasses on here, excuse me. I never lost sight of my dream to have a PA, and they just seemed to vanish overnight. I was working on switch engine in a little town called Bellevue, Ohio, and I saw two of them go through dead in train. Oh, what's that? And they were the ones on the Delaware and Hudson up there that they were sending to Chicago to get rebuilt. And then I watched those engines and, you know, their life and how everything changed up there. This was the engine that I would eventually own. And so, trying to get my thoughts together here. Like I say, I followed the history of these, and they went to the D&H, and they had them rebuilt. Then all of a sudden, they weren't using them anymore. So first, they put them on some sort of little freight train and ran them. And but after a while, this is how they ended up. That was in Mexico. They had plucked them like a Christmas turkey. And I kept going down there. I don't know how many trips I made down there, back and forth, talked to the people. And finally, I was on this, I don't know how you would describe it, sojourn. And I got fortunate enough to be asked to be on the NBIC, that's the National Boiler Inspection Code. They had a group on there to help, because most of the boilers are not locomotive boilers in this country. So they had a separate little part that we were in. And went to Mexico, back and forth, I don't know how many times, maybe a dozen times. And finally, it come down to Fisher cut bait. So I got a hold of some folks, and I had some money, and we went down there, and the Mexicans wanted money. And I was working with Bill Withune at the Smithsonian Institution. He wanted one for the Smithsonian. And he was working his, and we got one of the engineering standard committees. We started talking. I said, why don't we join forces here and get two of them at one time? He says, yeah, that's a good idea. So he had the political clout from that point with the Smithsonian. He was dealing directly with the big museum in Mexico, because they wanted to put one of them on display down there. And it ended up, I put up quite a bit of money, because they weren't going to, Mexicans wanted the money. And so they went down to Mexico to bring them back. Got too far ahead there. So that's the way they were in Mexico. And when I got down there were no trucks. And I searched everywhere for them. Well, they'd had a scrap drive, and they were all just scrapped. So now I'm beating the bush, everybody I could talk to. And a friend of mine, a rail fan, called me up. His name was Mike Del Vecchio. He said, hey, there's a guy you need to talk to in Montreal. So I called this guy up. His name was Ken Annable. And I called him up and introduced myself. And I said, I want to talk to you about those trucks. They had a rail welding plant in Smiths Falls, Ontario, that they had scrapped. And we told them to set the trucks aside. So I said to him, I said, I want to get those trucks. He says, oh, another player in the game, eh? And I said, well, I didn't know we were playing a game, but count me in. So he said, I got people calling me all the time. They want me to donate those trucks here and donate them there. And I says, well, I don't want to donate them. I want to buy them. Oh, you have money. And I said, well, yeah. He says, well, how much are they worth? I said, I don't know. They belong to you. You tell me what they're worth. He said, well, I don't know. I said, well, let me tell you what I do know. They weigh 66,000 pounds apiece, and there's 6 of them. And I hear this old-time ad machine, click, 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 click. And he comes up and he says, how about $4,000? I says, is that American or Canadian? He says, oh, Canadian, of course. I said, I'm on my way to the bank as soon as I hang up. He said, well, I got to have the money. And I went right to the bank, and it was like $2,700 American. And I bought these trucks. And we went to Smiths Falls. My brother and I got together because he lived in that part of the world. We went to Smiths Falls, and I hired a crane, come down, they load them. There were 3 trucks in each gondola, and Bill Withune had managed to convince the CP to haul them for free all the way to the West Coast. And all they had to do was get them from Vancouver down to Portland. So we got them down there. I made friends that had this short line, and we got in their shop and unloaded them. That's me in the gondola. We unloaded these trucks. And so I went back down to Mexico finally to load these. Finally, we got this agreement with the Mexicans, and everything is good to go. So I go down there to load them up on. I got to load 2 of them on flat cars, and I assumed that they knew what they were doing, but they had a couple of cranes, and we were loading them. Now the little crane had more power than the big crane did, so it would only go up, and when it got hot, that's about as high up as it would go. And we finally wrangled it on there, and we did both of them. And this was finally got them loaded on there, headed back north. And we got, it seemed like take forever to get them up even to the border. And we got to the border, and the one railroad there wanted to redo the bindings. And they said, no, that ain't going to work. They were going to send them back. And I called Bill. I said, Bill, you got to do something. So he got on the phone, and they finally agreed. And they come down there, and they just put 2 big cables through the thing and cinched it down. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. It's going to go right to the West Coast and come up the West Coast. No, ain't going to go. Went all the way up through Denver, all the way up to the northern tier, come all the way down, even through a branch line, because the height restriction, that exceeded the height restriction on a lot of the places they went. So it finally showed up. It was probably 2 months getting it here. And it showed up. This is what we got on the flat cars. Ironically, it showed up on Easter Sunday of the year 2000. And I said, the resurrection begins. So I had these trucks and got these flat cars over there. We were going to put them, put them on the wheels. Well, it didn't fit because the bowl on the trucks was smaller than the post on the engine. So I wrestled with it and wrestled with it and wrestled with it, trying to figure out what to do next. So by now the friendly railroad is wanting their flat cars back. So we had to set them on the ground. We got a crane company. Now there's a little story here. The crane company originally had a brand new 100-ton hydraulic crane, and they hadn't used it but once. They wanted to send it over and show it off. They brought it over to the yard there, and the owner's son where the crane is, and he swung around to reach over on the truck and get the rigging, and he didn't put the outriggers out. And that brand new millionaire crane went down, landed on top of the trailer, bent the whole framework up for the brand new crane. So now they're a little paranoid about it. So this is what they sent down to pick up this engine. It only weighs probably 60 tons. And they got a 200-ton crane there to pick it up. So they got them set on the ground there. And now I had a dilemma. How am I going to adapt these trucks to the car body? And I tried all kinds of plans. The only way I managed to do it was go under there and cut the post. We call it a bissel post. It's a piece of steel about 4 inches thick and a little over 2 feet in diameter. And luckily it was hollow. I took my torch and I had to cut those off of there completely and make new ones and then put them back up on there. And I spent probably 2 weeks on each one of them getting it all welded back on there. And while I was there, Mike Delvecchio, not Mike, but one of the guys come up, wanted to do a thing for Trains Magazine about. They wanted to do an article on this whole fiasco. And he come up there and he had to take pictures, and I was inside and outside. And he took this picture and published it in Trains Magazine. It's a half a page, me with that big grin on my face. And I finally looked at it and I said, "Did you look real close at this photo?" And he says, "Oh yeah, it's a great photo." I said, "Well, there's a couple of things that aren't right." He says, "What's that?" I says, "Well, if you look, my jacket's buttoned, one button off." And he says, "Oh yeah, it is." And I says, "Not only that," I said, "my fly is unbuttoned." And that went into Trains Magazine, a half a page picture of me in there. So, and after we got all of them pretty well put together, we had to put them back on the trucks. We got another crane in there. Only this one's just a crane. And these guys who work those cranes, they're artists. They can move things just a quarter of an inch if they want to. And we got it down there, and we set that engine down on there, and I looked at it, and I said, "The resurrection begins." So now I had it, and I had to move it from where it was down at Albany up to Portland where the shop was. So I needed to have brakes on there. The railroad ain't going to have go without brakes. So I built a mobile brake system, and I called it the Dabco brake system, Doyle's Air Brake Company. And I made it so I could slid. It was on a framework, and it slid it right in the front door of the nose, and I could hook up all the hoses I need to hook up to make the brakes functional so that they were legal to move on their own wheels. And so we planned a date. One of my friends, old Georgie, and we went down there and we coupled onto it. And we didn't get very far, and it derailed. And I said, "What now?" So we went back and started looking. Well, the problem was that those trucks that I had bought were up in Canada, where it snows a lot, and they sat there for 40 years and not moved. The wheels all turned, but all the equalization was froze up. So as soon as it got to a low spot, plunk, off it went. So now I spent the next 2 months down there freeing all of that stuff up. But we eventually got it. And we were off to Portland. Finally, I don't know, I was down there working out of Albany for probably a year before I got them where I could move them on their own wheels. And so that's the one that I own, and the one behind it is the one that these lads own. So I had also dabbled a little bit in other engines. I bought this F unit. Somebody twisted my arm. It was a good buy, and I got it all fixed up. We come down and we coupled onto the PA, and the little railroad we were at, George worked there as a part-time engineer, and usually the road foreman would go with us, but they'd had a derailment over on one of the other branch lines. They said, "Just take it and go." So the two of us, we just got on the engine and went 100 miles up the railroad there. And this was getting close. It's Lake Oswego, and we're only about 5 miles away from the engine house. And we finally got there, and we put it on the turntable. And I thought, yep, the resurrection is going to begin. And we took it in the engine house there and started on it. And it was a real a real challenge. This was getting ready to put it in the engine house, and within a couple of days, the sparks are flying. And I was modifying the nose to put the different number box on there because the nickel plate didn't have those. They had another size number box. And the guys come down. I had a lot of good people. They spent a lot of time with me down there, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And here we had started. You can see the number board there. The next picture, you can see the surgery we did. We had cut the other number boards off and patched everything up. And I needed some motivation. So I had this door. I painted it all up just like the Nickel Plate Railroad had it, and put it on there. And I thought, boy, that looks good. We got to do some more. So I found a place in Canada to make the new number boards. And it was kind of funny because I couldn't figure out where they were supposed to go. And I went through a bunch of photographs I had, and there was this photograph of a nickel plate PA straight on, onto the number board, and I could extrapolate with a ruler, blow it up, and measure how far up it needed to be and how far, so it was in the right place. So that was the number board. And there's the body work is started. Everything's on there. We got the number boards on. We're in the engine house here at Brooklyn. And you wouldn't believe that place. It looked like a junkyard. But worked there for quite a few years. But we finally got the nose sorted out. And we had a friend of ours come up. We called him Bondo Bob. And he did all the body work on that nose section. And he was fanatical about it. I don't know how many gallons of Bondo I bought. And he would put it on, and he would sand it off, and he would put it on, and he would sand it off. And but he got it. It's a phenomenal job that he did. That's a head-on section. And then Bondo is something you can't leave out in the weather, or even in the summertime, because the moisture in the air will absorb into the Bondo. So as soon as you get the Bondo done, within a day or two, you got to paint it. So I painted it. And it's starting to look like a locomotive now. It just takes perseverance. But the other thing we had to do, I bought from the BCR a wrecked M420B unit, which had all the internal components I need to put in this car body. Everything was there. All I had to do was transplant it over in there. So we went inside and started cleaning the junk out of there. And there was quite a bit of, some of the stuff was like the air tanks there. They had left them in there, which was a good thing for us. So we cleaned it up a little bit. We took everything out of there, cut the old electrical cabinet out. We got ready to put the new electrical cabinet in, and I measured it, and it's 8 inches too wide. So then I had to take the new electrical cabinet and to take the whole electrical system out of a locomotive, pull it all back into one bucket. So you get back in the engine, you just put it back out where it needed to go, and you could hook everything up on it. So I finally got the new electric locker there, and you can see I got coils of wire everywhere. And one of the guys wanted to take my photograph, so with all the wire, they looked at it and said, "You're never going to be able to do that." But my experience and knowledge from being on the submarine and in the Navy, I learned all about it because I was an IC electrician. So I knew exactly how to do this. So as we go along, we finally got the wires run, and we fired up the lights. Boy, they look good. Of course, now the dust is getting pretty heavy on the nose. And every once in a while, we just take it outside because they'd have to do something over there. And it started to look better all the time. So this was the back end. Now this kind of puzzled me. It's got an air compressor in it, but the air compressor is mounted in the back, and once you put the engine in there, you can't get to the air compressor to get it out of there. You got to rebuild it in place. So that was, luckily I had a good compressor. So we got together our giant overhead crane there. We just picked it up. We got it up high enough. We just rolled the engine under it. It's on the way up. We set it down in there. Now we had to slide it. We used 2 pipes. You see the lad in the background? Had to come along, and we just slid it back there where it needed to be, right up against the afterdrive. So we got ready to put the engine in it out of this M420B unit I bought, and we got the thing all fixed up there. We had plucked it like a Christmas turkey. Everything we needed in there, we had taken out except the prime mover, the engine and generator. So that was all the left of the B unit. Time we got done butchering it out. So we're going to have crane day where we're going to put everything in. Well, in the meantime, we had a little problem with the F7 we had, and we blew that engine up too. So we're going to trade out engines in 2 locomotives in one day. And it's only, $250 an hour. What can you do? So we brought it over there, and this crane operator come in there, and I like I say, I marvel at these guys that run these cranes because they could pick that thing up out of there like it was greased. And we just picked it up, and then we rolled the engine under it. That's picking it up off of there. And then we lowered it down in there. We got it down in there, and it didn't fit. I said, something's not right here, because when MK rebuilt these are the engines, the same ones that Morris Knudsen put in there when they remanufactured the engines, and they wouldn't fit. So I called the guy that knew more about Alcos than any man in the world, and I called him, and I said, I got a problem here. He says, well, what's the problem? I says, well, I got this M420 with this 12-cylinder engine, and it won't fit down in there. He said, what do you mean? I says, the corners of it hit the pan before it gets down on. He says, well, you got a marine engine. I said, well, it came out of a locomotive. He said, I don't care what it came out of. It's a marine engine. It's 4 inches higher than the others. So I had to get these big steel blocks, drill the holes, fit them all up in there, weld them down. Then we could set the engine back down on it. So there they are getting ready to slide it down in there. I'm there to supervise. It was amazing. It was tight fit, but it slipped right down in there. I was sitting in the car body on wooden blocks because we didn't know what else to do at that point. The same day, we shoved up on the F unit there, and we swapped out an engine on that too. Everything was back together. We'd started putting the panels on, and we went in the shop, and it was at times pretty hectic in there, but these are my friends that all came down to help me, and I'm forever grateful to them for the help that they gave. So that's me there grinding something. And I'm also somewhat of a painter, so I was painting these panels. Now, they built these engines the siding material was plywood with a thin layer of steel on it. They call it ply metal. And but it's not what I considered to be what I wanted to put in there. So I re-engineered the whole system of how it fitted in there. And that's me painting one of the first sheets. And we had to drill all these holes to get everything to fit. And we drilled over 2,000 holes and tapped them to get those panels screwed in there. And these are a couple of the young guys that come down. I always like the young guys because they got a lot of oomph. No, that's not. That's Skylar. I like the expression on his face. There's a guy named David Marentet, one of the neatest people you ever want to run across in your whole life. He was a retired college professor, and he just had a mind like a steel trap. And we're putting the panels up, and the old adage is, measure twice, cut once. I'm measuring things up, see if I can make it fit. Now, when you get these panels up, you got panels down here and panels here, and you got to put a strap over them called a batten strip, and we had to drill all the holes that those bolts went into. So that's David there with the mag drill all day long, drilling holes. Now I pre-painted everything as we put it up. We got one there, we're getting ready to go up there and put it up. And then you do the screw routine. You got to run the tap in, clean the threads. We put plastic shims behind it so it come out to where it needed to be. Also, without the metal-to-metal contact, you don't get the rust down in there because you get a nice clamping effect. Every once in a while, I just need a little motivation, so I'd come down and take a look at it, just admire it. Now, this is a Nathan M5 horn. That's what the nickel plate PAs had on it. And this one, I carried around for, 30 years? Laurie used to say, I left my coffee table behind and you want to... So I had this horn, and I won't tell you how I got it, but I got it a long time ago. And I got it all tuned up. So there's a strip that comes off this, right? It's the gutter for the water coming off, and it's got a nice arch to it. And it was gone off of there. They'd cut most of it off. And but a guy in them in Minneapolis, Bud Ballgren, he's a rail fan that would go down there. And he was a railroader. And he had been to the museum where the other two PAs were at. And he got permission to trace out the ones that were on those other engines. So he got a big piece of brown paper, and he just traced that whole thing out. And I put them together up here, built them, and then that's me and Tater Head there trying to put it up. Everybody gets a nickname if they work in our shop, if you're there very long. And every time I go in, she looked a little bit better all the time. Then the NRHS come to town, and they had their big convention there, and they come over and they wanted to get a night photo of the PA. And I said, well, it's only done on one side. They said, that's all right. We can use one side. So we up and painted one side of it. That was Bondo Bob, painted it all up, silver trucks and everything. And they had it for the night. And the lights work. It's kind of neat to be outdoor or outside and have the number boards. Then the air tanks, luckily the Mexicans left the air tanks in there for me. I didn't have to buy or build new tanks. And we got the air tanks and we're putting them up where they need to be. That's for the air brake system itself. And then now that I got the panels up, I started laying out the name. And this is something I learned from an old guy years ago on the 759 project. And I traced it all out, and I painted it. And it was, you need motivation when you're doing one of these, because you bang your head around it for a long, long time. You need something to encourage you to keep going. And every once in a while, when we had it outside, I had to take another picture. You know how it works. And I had the F7 and the PA there, both of them with bad engines. So some of this other stuff may get a little technical on you. These newer locomotives, the older ones like this one when I got it, had a great big rack down on the nose, had all the air equipment on this great big. And I took that out of there, and these are called a unitized brake system. And they're so simple, it make you cry. It's mounted to a panel, and you take all of the valves out at one time. You come in with the next one, you put it in there, bolt it up, and you're ready to go. But we had to replumb everything. That's where all that copper wire is going. And then sometime, you know, a guy needs to take a nap. So had to take all of the engine, take all of the parts down so you could make sure they're okay. We got them all put together. When you're laying down, it's not that bad, I guess. And we had to take the heads off and go through them. Then I had to fabricate all of the skirting because that was all gone. And they were smart enough, or I wouldn't say smart enough, but I was lucky enough, they had the end of one of those panels left on there. So it gave me the curvature for the shape, and I built all these panels to go back up there. Same with the door panels. We had, I think Bob's probably been seen the stuff. So we get more of the panels up. Took it outside, 2 Alcos together. What more could you ask for? I mean, and there was a big project that had to be done. It's a dynamic brake assembly. And that's what I'm working on there. And to give you a perspective, it's a big trough, that's what it is. And the grids are on each end, and there's a big blower that goes in the center, and it blows the air out to cool the grids. And so I had to fabricate all of this. And that's looking down through the hole. That's almost the whole thing. Now I got to get that in the engine itself. So I raised it up. So we got our giant overhead crane again and picked up the part that was fabricated on the floor. We put it in the engine. It's only on one end and the other end. So I had to go up then on top and put in all the cross bracing and everything that goes up on top. When you get that all done, then you can start doing the sheet metal on that. That's the turbo, the exhaust, and I had to have a hatch for a hatch because there's a hatch that the turbo goes on, and it's part of the big hatch. So fabricated that all up, and lo and behold, it fit. And then the plumbing on the M420 was just totally different of what the engine was set up for. So I had to go in and rearrange all of the plumbing for the coolant system. I finally got it all done. At this point, it's a whole locomotive. All the external pieces are finally in place. except one little hole there that I had to fix. And you can see the new door openings. This was the plumbing for the cooling water coming down, because the old one had 2 lines that went back to the radiators. This one all went to one, so it took a little bit of engineering to get this whole thing put together again. That's the oil down here going to the cooler. That's why I say it was a plumber's nightmare, to put it mildly. We had to put steps up the back, because in the old days, they didn't have steps up the car bodies on the PAs, because now everything with OSHA and everything, you had to have access to the roof to get over to clean the windshields. And paint. Starting to look like a locomotive there. On the right there is our steam heater car. We called it Little Boy. It was just a short, 47 feet, and it had 2 steam generators in it. And we use it for our steam powered on the cars. You need the heat and everything. So that supplies the steam into the steam cars. When I put that engine in, I raised it up 4 inches. Well, everything, it's a drive line that goes the whole length. So I had to come in and raise everything up in the back and everything up in the front, so everything lined up like it was supposed to. And when we got the engine, the car body, our friends down in Mexico had a party in the cab and set it on fire. So we had to go in and redo the whole interior. Then when you get that, you paint it, it doesn't look too bad. Windows were another problem, because everything was gone. Everything that was aluminum that they could steal was gone, and all the window frames and everything. So I had to design the wing window. Now on the early PAs, it was a window wing just like you have in an automobile. You know, you had that little 3-cornered window and a little crank on it. Now, that was gone, and I wasn't going to try to redesign that, so I just built these frames out of aluminum. And I got regular FRA glass, which is, about a 1/2 inch thick? And it's laminated 3 laminations. So I went down to my guys at the BBC Steel, and they got one of these water jet cutters for cutting steel. I said, will it cut glass? He said, probably. So I had him cut the glass out for those wing windows, because they're FRA glass now. I made the frameworks, they fitted in. And then the cab is pretty well put together. Windshields were a problem. I had to beat the bush for a long time, but I found an outfit, I want to say in Pennsylvania, and they said, you give us a tracing of the hole, we'll make the window. So I made the tracing and sent it off to them. And lo and behold, the window came back and it fit. All I had to do was go around with the screws and screw it in place. That was outside of the windows. And then internally, all the internal doors were gone also. Had to fabricate and make all of those. And then the traction motors was the last thing to go in. Now, if you've not been around a railroad, a combo weighs about, I think, 12,000 pounds. So the M420 had a different style of journal box, but the bearings were the same. So I took the journal boxes off of another piece of equipment I had and put them on there. And the guys, I had fun with this. They're swapping the boxes themselves. And then I would test them before I put them in. And all you got to do, if you look, the journal box is sitting up on blocks, and the wheels are there free, and you just take the welder, your DC welder, and put it on the leads, and the guys are saying, no, this can't. They're in a panic over it. But I tested them. They all tested just great. Now, to get it down into the engine, we had a little drop table in there, and I mean a little one. It was only like 45 inches. Well, these traction motor combos exceeded that dimension. So I had to take them down in the pit on an angle like that, then slide the whole thing over onto the engine, and then carefully raise it up where it engaged with the lock on the nose end. And once you got it up in place, you just roll it off of there. And there was a point where we got sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but they said get out. The UP was going to rebuild all of that, so we knew that was coming, and some of us knew we had to find a new place. So we went down the street a little bit, about 1.25 miles. We found a little strip of land down by OMSI, that's the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. And it wasn't very wide, but it was enough we could get an outbuilding on there to get the three locomotives on there. And we bought it from the UP. They wanted $975,000 for a strip of land that was only 1.25 acres. But we had no choice. We had no place else to go. So we had some folks that put up the money. And we're getting ready to do this, and TriMet come over. That's the transportation arm in the city. They said, we need that piece of property you want. Geez. He says, no, listen to us. He says, we need that property so we can move the whole railroad over. And he said, we know that you've got a bid on it, and we want to help you. So they said, we will take your property, and we will assemble you a piece of property that's equal or greater. And they said, we'll have all the expense. So we finally got around. We had to get out of Brooklyn. We brought them down there and parked the engines, and we had overnight watches and everything. But they come in there with their machinery, and they did a good job for us. We got a piece of property that's probably 2.5 acres. And and I was instrumental in making sure it was designed for what we needed, not for what somebody else wanted. This is the frame, the floor layout. And the concrete guy come in. I don't know how many hundred yards of concrete they put in that building because they knew these engines were going to be heavy. The floor in the back is 12 inches thick, and the next halfway up, they go to 11 inches, and in the front, it's 10 inches. So we got a new home to keep our engines in, and it's a beautiful place, and all the engines fit in there, and we had a grand opening there, and I even kept the PA in there, and it's lit like that night and day. So. Then I got a Jim Wren. I don't know if any of you know Jim Wren or not. He was an editor of Trains Magazine. And they were going to have this thing in Spencer where they had the grand, and he twisted my arm, and finally I said, okay. But I still had to put a lot of stuff on it, especially all the paint. So he negotiated with the BNSF, and out of town it went. Went all the way to Spencer and back, and I chased it because I was, like a mother with a new baby. And because I was terrified that out in the middle of nowhere they'd have a problem and leave it behind, and I got no way to work on it. But it went all the way there, and we were at Spencer, and we were the hit of the show because there were only 2 Alcos there, and this one was the one that got the most attention. So we had a good time, I got to admit. And, this was taken at Spencer, and this is the engine when it was finally done. We got it back home, and there it is, complete. Grills, everything. And if you compare it, this was a builder's photo of the real 190 in Lima. That's what mine looks like. And just to give you some perspective, yep, too far. That's what we started with, and that's what we ended up with. So. But we finally got around to starting it up, and I think I can make this work. We had it out back, and we got everything ready, and how do I make this go? Nope. There's a button on here, and that's got a video where we did get it running. So the building that we had made, when we left Brooklyn, we asked what they're going to do with the turntable. They said, if you want it, take it out of here. And we did. And that in itself was it's 100 feet long. But we finally got the turntable done, and that's in the front of our building where we can put engines on them and turn them around. And I'm in love with that turntable. They did a great job putting that back in. But over time, time takes its toll. And I come down there to work one day, and they brought a couple other engines into town, and my PA was sitting out under a tarp out there, and I was running back and forth to the engine house to get tools. And it was kind of drizzling, and I got about halfway back, and I stood and looked at it, and I said, you're never going to finish this. It's just too much work. So I got a hold of some people that had made an offer to me several years before, and we cut a deal, and I sold my PA to them. At some point in life, you have to look out for what you love and not hoard it. So they took it and they hauled it all the way to Scranton. The poor guy that come down, his name was Charlie Newton, to bird dog the thing, and he was a month going from Portland to Sacramento. And so we were at Sacramento, and they had so many people there at their shop, or not Sacramento, Scranton. I get them mixed up. And they had us out front there, and we got ready to leave and to go down to the shop, and lo and behold, there's my engine that I started my life on right there. The two of them together, my first and my last, that's what I was saying. So they said I can come down there and play with the PA anytime I want to. But that's a 759, which is the first engine that I ever got started with. So right now, I'm feeling pretty good about it. So I hope I didn't bog you down too much here. And I appreciate you coming out, So if you got any questions, I'm more than happy to stand around and BS with you. How's that? Thank you.